Hey everyone, welcome back to Workshop Quick Takes. Thanks for joining me on my YouTube channel. Today I'm tackling the radiator on my 2000 Jeep Cherokee. Now, it's starting to leak over here near where the lower radiator hose enters. So the first thing I checked was to tighten up the hose clamp fitting. Those can loosen up over time, especially if you've changed your hoses recently and then the hoses break in. That didn't do the trick. It's still leaking from over here, so I'm pretty sure it's the tank seal between the plastic tanks on the side and the aluminum radiator core. Now, one catch, which you may encounter also depending where you have available to work, is that I had to drive this vehicle to this location in order to gain access to the space and tools I needed for this job. Correspondingly, the engine is still pretty hot and I can't disassemble a cooling system, but that's okay because in order to do this one, I need to remove this front face and the top radiator support bracket in that order in order to get full access to the radiator, along with the front fan, of course, and the fan shroud. So I can do all that while I'm waiting for the rest of the engine to cool down. Another thing that's worth checking while you're waiting is to make sure you got the right part. This is a CarQuest radiator from Advanced Auto Parts, not necessarily because I have a preference for them, but because it was the only one left in town the night I went shopping. Supply chain issues right now are real, folks. Okay, so I recognize this. That's the stopcock that's underneath the passenger side headlight. Obviously the radiator sits this way in the engine bay facing the engine, that side towards the front. I've got my radiator up here. My radiator cap hopefully fits on that. Right here is the overflow tube. Here are the upper and lower radiator hose entry points, and then these two connections are for the transmission cooler. This is an automatic transmission, and so the ATF cooler flows, I think it's in the bottom and out the top if I didn't get that backwards. And a couple spare brackets and parts, and then a permanently molded stop here that I'm not going to be removing. So I think we're good. There's probably going to be some rubber pieces on the bottom of the existing radiator that I need to remove and reinstall on here, assuming they don't stay down in their slots. And then a couple bolts up here. So this part's going to be relatively quick and easy. Most of it's going to be disassembling the front of the vehicle right now. On this particular car, the first step to disassembling the front is to remove these little decorative fascias around the headlights. Don't lose the screws. You don't want to find those in your tires later. Now, the reason for doing that is there's that bolt right back there that has to come out in order to finish removing the front fascia. So before we can do that, we're also going to have to remove the corner marker lights to make room. These come out with 2 more screws. If you want, you can leave these hanging loose, but I'm going to go ahead and just remove it completely. The headlight assemblies can actually stay in. They will come out with the front fascia on this particular vehicle. All right, we're starting to get serious now, so I'm switching to gloves. For this next step, I've got a 10mm socket and a short extension that I'm going to use to remove the bolt on this side and on that side as well. You don't need an electric ratchet for this, but it does make life a whole lot easier. On this particular one, I've also added a washer just to protect the fascia. Keep in mind, this entire assembly here is fiberglass, so if these bolts get over torqued, you can actually just blow a hole right through it, so you don't want to do that. Get a nice close view. We're going in for this guy right here. And once more, a washer that I added. Okay, so that's what I have to remove from the front. But next, there's a row of bolts down under the back side here that we got to get at. So the first one of those is right there. Second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one, and then the sixth one at the other end. Except that one was busted off. Just keep in mind that if you're working with a completely stock setup, there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bolts that have to be removed from the inside. And those, again, will be 10mm. Still using the ratchet, but now this time without the extension, although if you wanted to, you could use a long socket to get a little more clearance and it would still fit. Okay, this whole front piece should be loose except for an electrical wiring harness on this side that connects to the lights. Now I've done a little customization on this one, so I've got this fog light looped through here. So in order to finish getting this off, I'm going to need to disconnect a connector that I have up next to the battery that won't be on any OEM setup. Fish that out. And then also disconnect one of my 4-wheel driving lights down here. Over on this side, I've got a similar situation. I do need to disconnect my 4-wheel driving light here. And then I have a decision to make because this connector is very, very difficult to disconnect inside the thing here. And that thing's really stiff with age. It'd probably just end up trashing it. So I'm going to try and just leave it in that position like that. It's not the most elegant thing in the world to have it sitting like that, But compared to busting a major electrical connector and then really being in a fix, I think it'll work out. I can still get to the top 2 bolts on the upper radiator mount here, and here, along with everything else I need in order to finish disconnecting this. So let's give it a shot. Okay, in this next step, there are 4 8mm bolts, 2 for the front main fan shroud, 2 more for the auxiliary electric fan. They need to come out, along with the hose clamp for the overflow line right here. 8mm sockets are often pretty small. In this case, this one's a 1/4 inch drive, so I'm using a 1/4 to 3/8 adapter. These have been replaced. Yours might not be quite as long, but the factory ones should still be an 8mm head. This is an insulated conduit strap. It's also not OE, but they're very cheap to get, and I highly recommend using one in place of whatever was originally there, because by now it's broken. And you don't want this hose to flop forward down into the fan. On this vehicle, this overflow line is not a pressurized component, so regardless of what state the cooling system is currently in, I can go ahead and remove this now, as long as I know there's no flow going back into the tank. Yours may or may not have a hose clamp on this fitting, but I'd recommend putting one on there just as a precautionary measure. For now, we're just going to get this hose out of the way over here, and then we have to remove this electric fan and this fan shroud. The electric fan has another fitting down here that pops apart with a little clip. And lifts straight out. Main fan shroud is a little trickier because you've got to work it around the fan blades down here, and it wants to get caught right about there. Yeah, it kind of wants to get caught on the fan right there. That you just need to work out and around and break it. Well, I guess I'm getting another one of those soon. It's been in and out a few times and it's been gotten pretty hot, so I guess I'm not surprised that happened. Okay, so the next thing I need to tackle is the upper cross member here. For sure, I'm gonna have to loosen the battery strap. Looks like there's a screw here that's already partway come out for me. This here is holding in the radiator. This here does not need to be removed. Neither do any of these screws for the front lip, but that is holding in the radiator. And then there's these 2 down here. When I get all those out, I should be able to remove the entire top cross member and have free access to the radiator. A couple other things to watch out for when I get to this step is the radiator is going to start to loosen up a bit, and I do have these 2 oil cooler lines to deal with before the day is over. So let's get started with the battery here. This one happens to have 2 points where it's tightened down to hold the battery in place. I might be able to remove this and just loosen that and flip it out of the way, but we shall see. For sure, this one here is a 10mm. Notice this screw has a captive washer. Keep that in mind for when you need to put it back later. Find out what's going on with this one here. Completely loose. Okay. Last 3, again, all 10mm. Top support is now loose. And there it is. We now have full access to the radiator itself, and notice that the AC condenser is attached to the front. We want to be careful not to bang that around too hard while we're changing it. And it looks like the 2 L brackets that the system shipped with are right here, so we'll be using the new ones, but we're reusing these rubber mounts. So we now have great access to our upper radiator hose here. We're still going to have to get at the transmission cooler lines. This one we'll be disconnecting up here. We do have the option of removing that quick clip down there too if it's a problem. I'm hoping not to. And the bottom one down here is a quick clip also. And then of course we've got our other radiator hose. I'm going to remove all this stuff here last because I don't want the AC condenser flopping around while I'm working on the rest of this. Okay, so let's see what it takes to get a crescent wrench on the back of this here so that we can... And now I believe we need a 19 to remove this other end. Okay, that's how you make it work with metric tools. But if you have an English wrench set, then a 15/16 box end and a 3/4 box end work a little bit better. Use the 15/16 to hold the larger bushing next to the radiator and a 3/4 to turn off the flare end. The fitting you're trying not to turn is threaded into the radiator tank. If you loosen it, it will seep ATF. Not the end of the world, you can rewrap it with Teflon tape and put it back in, but it's frustrating to have to go back and do that later. Finally, tie the finger of a nitrile glove over the end of the hose to prevent it from dripping while you're working. The bottom one down here is going to be a little trickier because it looks like we have to get to one of those quick connects. Boy, is that in there tight. I'm not even sure if I can get at that with this tool. This one connector here will be the most frustrating part of this entire event, and there's just no way around it. The stub off of the OEM radiator is just too short to get a tool down in there effectively and remove that last quick connect. One thing you can do, which worked for us, although it still wasn't an easy fix, was to actually shave off a little bit of the extra length from the snap tool we got at the auto parts store, and then it was a little bit easier to work it down in there around that odd curve. But one way or another, you do have to get this one off in order to finish the job. Start with this upper radiator connection. A little pro tip if you haven't figured it out already, make sure the screw ends up someplace that's easy to get to later. Still pretty hot. And this one, I need to see if there's a way I can immediately lift the hose as high as possible so I don't completely drain out the system, and I think there might be. Okay, there we go. That'll keep at least some of my coolant in the engine. So that's actually not so bad. I've still got a lot of coolant in the engine. I won't have to completely refill the system. I just did this system not that long ago, including the water pump and hoses, so I'm going to try and preserve as much of the existing coolant as I can. Okay, next step is I need to get this mounting hardware off of here, and that's going to include disconnecting the air conditioning condenser now. I've got a 10 here, I think, or maybe an 11, and these two are definitely 8s again. We did get new brackets with the kit, so we can go ahead and use the new brackets, but we're going to save all 3 of these and plan to reuse them. These look like they're still good enough. They're kind of hard, but they'll work. Okay, yep, that was an 11. Okay, same thing on the front over here, and keep in mind, as soon as this is all loose, so is the air conditioning condenser. Okay, we should now be able to lift the radiator straight up and out of its position. Make sure it's not catching on anything critical. And actually, the AC condenser, now that I've lifted that out, kind of wants to swivel out of the way. See the stopcock over here to clear. This is a piece that's actually worth saving off an old radiator, just in case you break one on a newer radiator. You'll have it instead of having to try and look it up special order at the parts store. This was recently replaced, so we're going to reuse it as well. I don't see any reason not to. Looks pretty clean. Nice little aluminum brackets. You can always save them and reuse them for something. Okay, so now that radiator can just finish coming out, and we're done with it. Let's just pause for a moment, survey where we're at. We've got the front clip off. We've got the radiator out by disconnecting 2 radiator hoses and 2 transmission oil cooler lines. You do a little cleanup down over in here to get the goo and gunk off with brake cleaner, especially since right now we've got better access than we've ever had. Make sure we didn't lose these 2, because these are the rubber supports that go here and here. They still seem to be in good condition. And we just need to remember when we slide the new radiator in that it actually drops through those 2 lower supports for the air conditioning condenser here. So that's gonna be a little bit fidgety to get into place properly, but it shouldn't be too bad. So now to pull a little brake clean out and just spritz off the mess that's lying around in here, because there is quite a bit of ATF down in there from some past leakage. Okay, that's probably a good start for now. We need to get to working on putting the new radiator together, so I'm going to install the brackets on top first and then try and drop the whole assembly in. Well, that there's not something you want to see on a brand new radiator, and under other circumstances I'd take it back for a replacement. This dent here isn't severe, and it's not too close to the end here where it might have actually ripped out one of the, I don't know how they form these, if that's a weld or what, so I'm gonna have to take my chances on it, because this is one of the last ones in town. The shipping problems and parts shortages in the industry are just legendary right now, so I'll go ahead and install it, hope it doesn't leak. If it does, I'll have to go through all this again, but I sure hope not. Be some kind of universal fitment option, because it looks like I'm also going to have to drill these out, unless by some lucky chance the radiator actually fits down on that and holds the AT condenser, then we might be good. Well, only one way to find out. Hey, first success of the day. I don't need the brackets at all, it actually fits. Okay, first up, this lower oil cooler line. Also gonna put a little WD-40 down on there just to lubricate it while I slide it on. Okay, at this point we should be ready to reattach the top rubber mounts here and then reinstall our top supporting cross member. And to get it in the first time, I kind of slid it under like this to get it under the battery there, and then it just came down on top of where it needed to be everywhere else. All right, so the last step of this before going to fluids is I need to get the front clip back on. So this, I need to very gently work it back around. And as soon as I have the necessary slack, push the connector back through there. And then also route my auxiliary lighting connector back through there and plug my fog lights back in. Make sure there's no water inside those connections. I think they're okay. So now then this sort of pushes onto the front, and these two screws down on the bottom need to line up with their holes. So it looks like we're in good shape. We got that screw lined up. We haven't pinched any wires. Those are still free. Same thing on this side, lined up. Haven't pinched any wires. And then on the back side here, if that went in correctly, then all of these should have lined up, and it looks like they did. Just gently to make sure it catches. Not cross-threading. Well, after removing that much, I do see I have some panel alignment issues on this. They're kind of normal on a Jeep of this age though, so I'm not sure how far I want to chase those, especially since this has a little bit of a misaligned front end anyway due to some past minor accident that occurred on the front there. But I'll go ahead and just slightly loosen everything on this side. A little better. I had to do a little bit of fabricating to just put 3 of the 4 pieces of this back together, so at least there's a top shroud guard until I get the new one ordered. But this should still fit down in the same spot. I've still got the same 2 tabs on the bottom, and it do. Okay, so the last steps now are going to be to put the lights back on, and then we should be good. Okay, very last step is to top off all fluids and then make sure we bleed all the air out of the cooling system. Okay, I bought concentrate, so I'm going to divide it between this empty bottle here until they're both half full, and then dilute it down with clean water, and it should have more than enough at that point to completely refill the cooling system and probably have some left over. Okay, the coolant is visually topped off, although since this hose sits higher than the rest of the engine, it's probably still full of air, but that's okay. I just need to make sure that I get this as full as possible and then put extra in the tank so that when it cools back down on the next cycle, it can suck it back into the system. The other thing I'm going to need to be watching out for, and actually it's settled down just a little bit more, is any leaks from the ATF system. I want to make sure there's nothing spraying around under here right after I start it. I'm not expecting it to, everything's tightened down. The other thing I'll then need to do is go back there and check the level of the fluid. I know it's slightly overfilled at the moment, so I have a feeling that once it refills the tubes and the cooling reservoir in here, it's probably not going to be a problem, but only one way to find out. So far, no fresh leaks. Well, hopefully that means it's ready to run for a while. About the only thing I can still do now is let it get good and hot and see if that radiator or any of the plumbing springs any leaks, but otherwise, that should be the job done. Hey everyone, thanks for being with us here on Workshop Quick Takes again. Hopefully you found that tutorial on replacing your Jeep's radiator to be useful. Funny thing about that video though, you can kind of watch me age from the start to the finish, but then again, maybe it was just the changing light, because that's not really a hard job. It is a long job, there's a lot to do. Give yourself at least 2 hours if you've done cooling system maintenance before, and maybe 4 if you're not quite as familiar. On the Jeep Cherokee XJ, the best thing I ever heard anyone say about one of these vehicles is that they're put together like a tractor. All the bolts are there, there's not a lot of tools required. You just have to take things apart in the correct sequence and then put them back together again. So, that being said, if you've got a vehicle out in the driveway that needs this service, what are you waiting for? Go do it. Thanks for joining us again. We'll see you again next time, whenever that is. Still pretty hot.
Has anyone seen my phone?